Hello cyberspace, my name is Garrett Mills and welcome to episode 2 in my series on version control using Git. In the last episode we talked about some basic abstract fundamentals and theories behind version control, and in this episode we're going to really dig our hands in and actually start doing some version control by setting up Git, creating a sample project, and running through some of the basics. If you haven't yet, I recommend you watch the first video because it talks about some of the constructs that we're going to actually use in this video. So if you haven't, you can do that by clicking the I in the top right hand corner. But if you've done that, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that you're going to want to do before we can start anything is you have to install Git. You actually have to install the version management software. So there's a link to the Git website down in the description below. If you're on Mac or Windows, just download the installer from the website and install it like any other program. If you're on a Linux distribution, you can open a terminal and run the command common to your distribution for installing Git. So say for Fedora and Ubuntu, here are a couple sample commands. So you need to download and install Git from that page or through your distro's repositories, and then we can get started. Alright, so now that you've got Git installed, whether you're on Mac, you're on Windows, or you're on Linux, all the commands are going to be the same for everybody. So that it doesn't matter what operating system you're on, all the commands from here on out will be the same for everybody. So you can check and make sure you've got Git installed by opening a command line on Windows or opening a terminal on Mac or Linux and running git version. And you should see something like git version 2.11.0 or later, depending on when you're watching this video. So there we go, we have Git installed. So now we can start actually getting into version control. So version control is all centralized around the idea of a repository, like we talked about in the last video. So we need to make a folder where we're going to keep our stuff. So I'm just going to open up my documents folder and make a new folder for the test project. So test project, and in this folder it's empty. So what we're going to do now is create some sample files to the test project folder, just so that we have something that we can change and modify and work with, just as an example. So open up a text editor of some kind. I'm going to use Atom, and open it up to that test project folder, and we're just going to make some sample files. So new file, hello world.txt. I'm just going to write hello world and say, and then we'll make a readme file in this test project. Alright, so I've got two files created, a readme file and a hello world file. Obviously for the purposes of this video, it doesn't really matter what files you create or what you name them or what you put in them. We're just using it as a demonstration. So we've got our project folder and we've got some test files, and we want to version control these files. So the way we do that is we're going to open up a command line. So the majority of work with Git and version control is done in the command line, and that shouldn't daunt you. It's really not that complicated. So what we're going to do now is we're going to change directories into the test project folder we created. So cd documents / test project. Now in here, inside the root folder for our project, we need to tell Git to create a version control scheme. And we do that by running the command git init, I-N-I-T. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a folder called a .git folder. And this .git folder contains all the data about the repository, so the changes and the commits over time, and it keeps track of everything. And so in this test project folder now we have a fully working version control setup. So the next thing we need to talk about is a Git Ignore file. And it's fairly self-explanatory. A Git Ignore file is a special file that Git uses to check which files it should automatically ignore and not version control. So we're going to create the file, then I'm going to explain it. So in the root of your folder, in the test project folder, create a file called .git ignore. All one word, all lowercase, and it has to be prefixed with a dot. So what a Git Ignore file does is it tells Git, it tells the version control software not to version certain files or certain folders. So say like you were using an IDE and that IDE kept data in a folder, well you don't want that folder to be version controlled because it's not part of the actual program. So you could tell Git to ignore it by putting that folder in the Git Ignore file. So let's make an example of this. Let's create a new file and say this is like our environment variables file. Environment.var or something. And so we've got like database information, so you wouldn't want your environment variables file to be versioned. So the way you could do this is to tell Git to ignore the environment.var file, just put it in the Git Ignore file. So environment.var. So now that that's in the Git Ignore file, Git will not version control the environment.var file. So now that we've got a Git Ignore file created, we can jump back into our terminal, and what we need to do first is add the files to version control. Now you can do this one at a time with each file by running git add and then the name of the file, so like hello-world.txt. So now I've added hello-world.txt to version control. But if I'm trying to add my entire project, that gets a bit tedious, so what I can do to add all the files that aren't supposed to be ignored, so every file that's not specified in the Git Ignore file, we can do git add and then a period and hit enter, and it'll go through every subfolder and every file, and it'll see if it's not in that Git Ignore file, then it's going to add it to version control. So we've added our README folder and our README file and our Hello World file to version control, but they're not, we haven't tracked any changes yet. So the first thing we need to do is create a commit, which we talked about in the last time is just a set of changes. So we do that by running the command git commit, and then every commit is required to have a message with it. So -m for message, and then in double quotes specify the message. So say initial commit, since this is like the first set of changes. So we hit enter, and it's going to look through and it's going to show us that we have 3 files that we're tracking were changed, and it's going to say that there were X number of lines inserted or lines deleted. So we've changed 3 files and we've inserted 3 lines worth of text in the files Git Ignore, Hello World, and README. So now we're tracking changes. So what we can do is I can make a change to the README. And so if I want to commit that change, I run git add readme.md, git commit -m, then just a couple words explaining the change, updated README, and hit enter. So it says 1 file was changed, 2 insertions, because I added this line and I added this line. So there we go. This is some very basic, this is the basics of how you version control. It's really that simple. Init the repository, add the files, and track commits. And as you make changes and commits, the version control is updated and stored in this .git folder. So the next thing that we're going to look at in this episode is remotes. So Git is very useful because it's a distributed version control platform. And we talked a little bit about this in the last episode. It means that multiple computers can have a copy of the same code, and they have a protocol for staying up to date with each other. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to share code between two machines, but we can also share code online using websites like GitHub. So GitHub is a free version control platform that we can use as a remote, and if we can push our changes to that. So all of these commits and all this code that we've created in our sample project, we can push all of the version control up to Git, and Git will track the commits, track the changes, and it'll kind of store a copy of it for us so that if anybody else wants to work on it, they can get a copy of the code. Changes can be done communally on GitHub, and it's really a great platform. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to github.com, and there'll be a link in the description below, and you're going to need to create an account. And once you create an account, you log in, you'll see a page similar to this. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to go up to the top of this plus sign, and you're going to click New Repository. Now this repository is going to be the online version of the repository we are hosting on our computer right now. So you want to give it a name that's easily recognizable as the project name, but obviously not too complex. So for example, we named the folder test-project, so I'm just going to call this repository test-project. You can put an optional description. And then set it to public. Don't initialize it with a README or a license or Git Ignore. Just hit create repository. So what that's going to do is it's going to create the repository online, and it's just going to be empty. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to tell Git, the local version of Git, the one that's running on our computer, that we want to connect to this this repository that we've created online. So what we do is we add a remote location using Git. So we run the command git remote add, then the name of the remote. So by good practice, the main remote site, like the main GitHub repository, we call that remote origin. It's just kind of a standard good practice. And then what you can do is if you're on the repository page, come up to the address bar and just copy paste this URL from the address bar into the command line. So that's the URL of your repository. Hit enter, and it's going to add the remote. So now what we want to do is all the changes we've made so far, all these commits and files that we've added to version control, we want to take them and we want to push them to our remote repository, so that the remote repository also has all the files and changes that we've done. So the way we do that is with the command git push, then the name of the remote origin, then the name of the branch. And since we haven't gotten into branches, we're just using the default branch, and that's master. So git push origin master and hit enter, and it's going to ask for your username and password for GitHub. So just put these in. Now for me, this command worked fine, and you might see something that looks similar to this output. But if it's your first time installing and using Git, you may have seen a message that says, I need to know who you are, please run a couple of configuration commands. And that's just because the way Git tracks commands to remote repositories is it submits the commits and it submits the push information with your email and your username. And so in order for it to do that, it needs to know what that is. So we need to set your username and your email address in the git config. And the way we do that is with the command git config -- global user.name, and then put in your username. This should be the same username that you used on GitHub. Git config global user.email, and this should be the same email that you used on GitHub. And then you can run the push command again, and it's going to ask for your username and password. And it should go ahead and push the changes up. And that way Git will store your username and your email, and you won't ever have to do that again. You just run the push command. So now if we come back over to the GitHub repository and refresh this page, what we'll see is all the files that we've tracked. No, not all the files we've created, but all the files we've tracked with version control show up. And so we can actually explore them online. We can see, our hello world file has hello world, our readme file, this is a test, hello world, we created all that, and our Git Ignore file, telling us that we're ignoring environment.var, which you'll notice didn't get uploaded, didn't get tracked. And so some stuff we can do on GitHub is we can kind of explore. So 2 commits were created. So these were the 2 commits that we've done, the initial commit and the updated readme. So what we can do is I can browse and see, okay, this initial commit, what was changed? Well, I created a Git Ignore file, a hello world file, and the readme file. And so say I wanted to view the files as they were at this commit, well, I can hit browse files, and I can see this is how it looked at this moment in time before, we did the commit where I added a line to this. And go back to commits, switch to just the main branch, and we can see the other commit I added, updated the readme, where I added 2 lines. And so GitHub is useful in that it shows us kind of a graphical view of the commits and changes that we've done. And likewise, I can keep adding files and making changes. So say I added a new file, license, and say this project is licensed under the new GPL version 3 or higher. Now obviously if it were a real project you would put the full text of the license in here. I'm just using this as an example. And then say in my readme I added license information. So now I can jump over to my command line, add the license file, and make a commit, added license info. And you'll see I made the commit locally, but it hasn't been pushed up here. So if I refresh the page, you see I don't have the changes up here yet. So to do that, I run git push origin master, and it'll upload them and store the changes. And now if we look up here, we see we have the license file. Ta-da! And if I click on it, I can view the changes I added. So this was a short episode, but it's just sort of a look at some of the basic uses for adding commits. So this was a short episode just getting hands-on, getting started with some of the basic constructs of Git. So we looked at initializing a repository, adding files to that repository, committing our changes, adding a remote repository on GitHub, pushing our commits to that remote repository. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at tagging and release versions, tracking our changes that way. We're going to take a look at branches, merging, and resolving conflicts that arise therein. Alright guys, thanks for watching episode 2 in my series on version control. As always, I'll be down in the comments. If you have any questions, comments, or you need help with anything, something didn't quite work right, you can connect with me down there. You can also connect with me on Twitter, Tumblr, Google+, my blog, by email. Links to all that stuff are down in the video description below. Be sure to like this video or share it if you thought it was useful or if it could help somebody. And as always, get subscribed so that you don't miss any of the other videos in this series or any of my other series, such as PHP development or Java development for Minecraft. And as always, thanks for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.